Hi, Mariam. Thank you for helping with my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm speaking today in a personal capacity. My involvement in the space sector has been on the commercial side so far. So I've worked as a space consultant, then working with different companies in the Canadian space sector to connect them to government programs. And I also volunteer in a number of nonprofits, mostly around mentorship of the next generation. So yeah, really excited to be here and to chat with you.
That's awesome. What got you interested in space?
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar for a lot of us people who are interested in space. For me, it was when I was younger, and it was mostly science fiction, actually. Like I'd be reading and watching a lot of science fiction, and a lot of science fiction I was looking into was revolving around space and humanity's future in space, and it got me really excited. Like I was reading stuff by Arthur C. Clarke and then Ray Bradbury and Heinlein and just all the classics. Asimov, and it just, yeah, it just set this foundation very early on to be thinking about these topics. And it was a hobby for a very long time for me, and it became a career more recently.
I do remember the first science fiction book or movie you saw.
This would be a tough one because I started when I was quite young, actually. It was like pre-teens or something when I was like a very prolific reader, not just science fiction, but also classic literature. And I really like fiction. So this would be a tough one, but I could talk about one of the movies that had a profound impact on me and that I still rewatch to this day. It's actually the Blade Runner, the classic Blade Runner movie. And I actually read the short story by Philip K. Dick that it was based on much later as an adult. But I think it's not even really about space, but it sort of touches around some of those ethical concepts of like, having humanoid life forms. And I think it's kind of implicit in space exploration that robotic exploration is the way we'll go. But I think a lot of the ethics around the way, technology will proliferate were sort of set by watching that movie and thinking about like, what does it mean to be human? What about artificial intelligence? What about synthetic life forms? And it kind of started like getting me to think about these topics, which I think eventually led me deeper into space topics.
That's awesome. Do you remember how you got exposed to it? Was it like a friend, a parent, just random?
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually my dad's old collection. So he has similar interests and he was really into these kinds of movies and I just saw it, it's like, okay, this is a cool movie to check out. And that's how I was exposed to it. But then a lot of the science fiction books I was reading, it kind of just happened. Like, I'd go with my mom to the store and she'd be like, okay, what are you interested in? And I'm walking around and these are topics I'm interested in. So a lot of it came from within, but then some of it also came from some of the interests my dad had, I think.
I do feel like that the nature of science fiction has changed over generations.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm also really into the Star Trek series, so I've watched quite a few. I haven't watched the original, but the other ones like The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, Voyager. And I do feel like science fiction has kind of gone through its phases, right? Perhaps it was a little bit more like utopian and just hopeful, especially in the Star Trek, right? Like Next Generation, like every episode is an adventure, and then over time I think like, we have these cycles of like dystopian and utopian science fiction. um, these days, for example, like that one that Don't Look Up that came out on Netflix, it was quite, I guess, a little bit like black humor and like dystopia at the end. Like it sends a message, right? There's like that warning kind of feeling to it. So yeah, I think, science fiction it represents the ideals of the people behind it. And I think ideals and values and experiences change over time and with generations. So you'll get a bit of color either way with science fiction. Like you'll get people who are more hopeful about the future, and then you'll get people who are, not so hopeful and are sending like a moral across to the audience. But I think the good thing about science fiction is just that for me, like I really enjoy looking at the pictures that people paint of the future, the different technologies they're thinking will exist, and the moral implications of it. Like it's very interesting to see humans in these settings and see the ways they react and the decisions they make, and it just gets you thinking, you know?
Yeah, I know. I mean, because I guess really good science fiction is not really about the science, it's about the people's interaction with each other.
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny you say that because I think of Star Trek as like a bit like a space opera for me. Exactly. It's not really, it's a setting. Like space is the setting, and it's I love space, but it's almost secondary, right? It's more about the different moral and philosophical and religious dilemmas that they're going through, and the societal structure. And yeah, it's like about those complex issues, between people and between species more than just being in space.
Yeah, it's kind of like those aspects of humanity that maybe most people don't even realize and just accept. So like,
Yeah.
what water is to fishes, are those things that people are very sensitive to whenever you talk about them. You can
Hmm.
talk all day about them when you the subject of is an alien, because it's like that's disarming, and of course it's naturally supposed to be strange.
Yeah, true.
And so, since you work in space, I guess you probably knew that NASA is planning to send astronauts back to the moon for the first time since 1972.
Yeah, that's exciting. And it's very, very much a hot topic right now with the announcement of those Artemis missions. And, I was actually just looking up like what is the latest on all of that? The plan to have like the uncrewed orbiting mission around the moon, and then the crewed lunar orbiting mission, and then eventually touching down on the moon. And I think especially the aspects around diversity, and those inclusivity elements of like who are the next generation of moon explorers going to be. I think that's been quite mindful in this next discussion of how this lunar exploration is going to proceed. So it's definitely an interesting time. I'm excited. I think, in this next decade, it will happen. I don't know the exact timing. I think none of us know right now. It's sort of like dependent on technology development, and this is sort of pushing those boundaries again, right? Like it's like you said, it's been since the 70s. So developing those human landing systems again, developing the capabilities to navigate to the moon, building on what we already have, but sort of, getting it ready again takes some time. So I'm excited. I really hope, it happens sooner rather than later.
Yeah, me too. What do you think we should expect to get out of sending people to the moon?
Yeah, I think this is a great question because when we look at the past, right, it was sort of new, untouched, like a new frontier almost, right? Going to the moon for the first time, developing those capabilities. It was also like geopolitical back then. Some may say that is a little bit geopolitical again now, but with different actors at play. And I think this is an important point to make because I do feel like, space is not just a civil domain. There's always other factors at play as well that fuel that sort of exploration and those missions. And it's very political because at the end of the day, you need to get funding to do these missions, and it has to sort of line up with your priorities. So part of it probably is like, okay, who's going to be back on the moon again first? Like, I hate to say it, but it might be a little bit of a race again. But part two, I think, like for humanity in general, I think space has great inspirational value. Like it's not just the moon, but every time we explore, every time we push the boundaries, we're in lower Earth orbit now. But I get even excited about the commercialization of lower Earth orbit. As NASA, as space agencies pushed back to go to the moon and then further into Mars, like they envision that the lower Earth orbit space will be, more like dominated by commercial companies, and it will be exciting to see what that ecosystem will look like, like who gets to go there, and like what kind of economy we develop in lower Earth orbit should be pretty interesting. And then building on that for the moon, I think it will be a little bit more exploration focused, more led by the space agency. So you'll have the astronauts basically going back there. I don't really think, commercial players will be going there in the near term, especially like for human presence. It will be mostly spearheaded by the government. And then, as happens, like, okay, the government takes the initial sort of investment, gets us there, and then commercial players begin to come, because at the end of the day, if you want it to be sustainable, if you want a true lunar presence and not just like last time where you go and then it's been a long time since you went back, you do need to have both private and public stakeholders involved in the initiative. So eventually, I think the plan, if you look into the Artemis program documents, is to have that sustained presence this time, to go to the moon to stay, right? So it will be interesting to see what that looks like. Some sort of base camp, some long-term presence, having astronauts on a rotating basis, and then beginning to think about, how do we, I think a lot of the initial sort of activities there will be around trying to understand how to utilize space resources. And then, yeah, I think, it's not just going to be one government, there'll be multiple governments out there. So what will that look like? We might be a little far from like civilian presence there, but definitely governmental presence, I hope, happens sooner rather than later as an initial stepping stone.
Whenever you look at the future of humanity, what does it look like to you?
Yeah, I think, I actually do really resonate with this multi-planetary species concept, as one of our great space companies likes to say, because I personally feel like it's not even that feeling of like, oh, humanity is going to get hit by an asteroid and we're all going to die. Like, sure, there is a probability for that. It's a very realistic, there is a percentage probability that that could happen. There's many extinction events that have happened throughout Earth's life cycle, right? But for me, it's more hopeful. Like, I think we should explore for hope, to expand and push our technological knowledge and to increase, like, what we know about our place in the universe, what we know about the universe itself, for discovery. Like, that gets me excited, and I think that will continue to propel us forward, because humans as a species were curious, not just in space, but on Earth too, right? We've had all these great explorers in history who discovered new lands. I guess I feel like it's almost in our DNA as humans to like want to push out and to look for new things and to go into the unknown. And I think that's going to continue to happen. And eventually, I think Mars, it does make sense. Like, it's another terrestrial planet. It's, I guess, fairly accessible. It has something of an atmosphere. You would have to like, make a lot of adjustments to have sustained human presence at that distance from Earth. But I think, we would eventually end up having these sort of outposts in the solar system. More realistically, I think in lower Earth orbit, one day we might have some kind of, space station where humans could live, perhaps. And I think it just makes sense, like, for sure, like diversifying, having different areas where you live as a species, but also to satisfy, that exploration element. So I really hope, we expand our presence and become a multi-planetary and, a species that thrives in the solar system as a whole.
That's awesome. Now, I have a thought experiment for you. Imagine your great granddaughter grew up her entire life on Mars, and she's now in high school, and she's doing a project for history where she has to go and research what was it like on Earth before space travel became common.
Yeah.
And she sees this interview with her great grandmother, Mariam. Do you have anything that you think would be worth sharing with her to help give her some insight into this particular moment in time?
Yeah, I think I would just say right now it's very exciting. Like you said, we're at the cusp. We haven't really yet left, but we're at the cusp of going into the unknown and exploring and trying to, take those next steps into the solar system. So it is very exciting. And I think like if this really happens and, someone sees this video in the future, like in your thought experiment, it's just a moment to be really proud of how far you've come, you know, how far humanity has come, where you are today, and just reflect on like those humble beginnings we had as a species. It's very exciting.
Well, Mariam, if it was safe and affordable, would you take a trip to space?
Oh yeah, hands down. Like there's no no doubt about it. I would love to go to space.
How far would you go? Like suborbital, orbital to the moon? Would you immigrate to Mars?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely quite a explorer. Like I would definitely want to go orbital. Like suborbital isn't enough. Those tourist flights these days where you just go for like a few minutes and like you have these billionaires doing it, like it wouldn't satisfy me enough. And I think for me, like I wouldn't just want to go as like a bystander. Like I would want to be someone who's doing the exploration, like a scientist, for example, like actively, trying to analyze the rocks, for example, on the moon, or like helping to establish some kind of life support system on Mars. Like for sure, like the furthest I could go, the furthest someone would take me and allow me to contribute in an effective manner, I would do it. So like I'd go all the way to Mars if it was a possibility. I do know that there's definitely significant risks involved with this kind of long duration space travel. And today we don't have, all the technologies, the radiation protection, deep space healthcare sorted out for that kind of trip to Mars, especially. But I do think we're there, like in terms of like the initial steps. More research needs to build upon that. We need to do more testing. Isolation is a real thing on these kinds of longer duration space flight missions, but I think we're beginning to set the foundations for that. Like if you look at space agencies' plans, longer term planning, like they do talk about Mars now. It's not just some sci-fi thing. So I'd be down. If someone was gonna take me, if I had a way to go, why not?
That's awesome. Well, Mariam, I know we talked about a lot of different topics. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't touch on?
I think I'd just like to ask you a bit more, Nathan. Like, I think you're doing a really great project, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about yourself, actually. If you could tell me about your interest in space. And I know we talked a bit about what sparked this project, but it would be a shame for us to end this chat without me knowing more about you.
Well, let's see. I've kind of always been interested in space, Star Trek,
Mm.
Heinlein, that was kind of an interest. When I graduated from high school, I was also interested in computers as well. And back
Cool.
in the mid 90s, the internet was just taking off, and
Yeah.
anybody who knew anything about computers got a job. It was a crazy time.
Yeah.
And once you get a job in the field, your next job
Yeah.
is usually in that field, and your next job is usually in that field. And you could easily
Yeah.
spend your entire career just kind of marching forward in that
Hmm.
that industry. Um, but over the past decade, my interest in space has kind of been revitalized, largely, I
Yeah.
think, because of SpaceX. Um,
Mm.
my younger son and wife, we went to Guadalajara in 2016 to watch,
Oh,
Elon Musk
that I see.
present the interplanetary transportation system, which later became the
Nice.
BFR and now is Starship. We've
Yeah.
I've gone to Boca Chica twice to see Starship,
Wow,
and
that's
kind of
so
drive by it.
cool.
I saw SM-13 while it was on the launch pad. I was hoping
Mhm.
that it would launch the week I was there. And I thought about staying over to see it. Of course, that was the
Mhm.
one that was in the complete fog. So even if I stayed
Yeah.
there, I wouldn't have been able to see it. uh, I started the North Houston Space Society, which is a local chapter of the National Space Society. And we have monthly
Cool.
outreach meetings. I volunteer at Space Center Houston as a greeter, to kind of talk to people.
Nice.
But most interestingly,
Yeah.
um, I have decided to take a professional step towards space.
Nice.
So
Congrats.
after
Exciting
25
stuff.
years of being in, the software, internet, computer industry,
Yeah.
this past week is my first week working at Johnson Space Center, training to be a flight director on the Spartan
Oh,
team for, working in mission control.
oh, that's
So
so exciting.
it was so
I'm
neat
so
to
excited for you, Nathan.
Me too. This past week has
That
been
is
like a
so
dream.
exciting. Congrats. That's so
On
exciting. Wow. So you're in Houston then, right? And
I'm in
Johnson Space
Houston.
Center is there and you're going to be a flight director. That is so
Well,
cool.
not
I'm so
director.
happy for
Oh,
you.
I hope to become a flight director at some point, maybe, but a flight
Yeah.
controller. So I'll be on.
Flight controller.
Yeah,
One step there, getting there. Yeah, that's really exciting. I'm so happy for you. I think that's so exciting because you'll be like, in mission control, right? Like it's a very sort of like dynamic role, and that's amazing. I love to hear these stories and I'm really excited for you, and you know that's super. Like let's stay connected. Let me know how things go for you, and if I'm passing by Johnson Space Center someday, maybe I'll message you.
that would be awesome. I do
Cool.
have one little aspect more to share, and that was on Friday, I got to do on the job training with somebody in mission control. So I actually got to go
Yeah,
inside for the first time, and it just felt
nice.
like so amazing to be in the heart of it. I know I was just an observer, but it
Wow.
was just like,
Yeah.
you got the astronauts up there, you have the flight director back there, you have all these different teams
Wow.
interacting, you're listening to, a dozen conversations going on at various
Yeah.
levels. It's just so amazing.
That's amazing. Wow. So you've started this last week, right? Or are you going to start soon? It's already you're
No,
in it.
I started last Monday,
Okay.
but now I have a year and a half to 2 years of training. Like
Gotcha.
next week, um, academy they call it, training academy.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just like
yeah.
an overview, and then after that you got boot camp, and then you have like all,
Uh,
yeah, I mean you have like all this stuff you got to learn and tests you got to take and sims you got to do.
You got this. That's so exciting. Yeah, we have like our flight controllers here in Canada as well at CSA, but there's fewer of them and it's basically around the Canada arm operations. But I know that, they also go to Houston to train and then they come back to Canada after the training is done. And it's quite intense, I've heard, but I think it'll be really rewarding for you and very exciting. And I'm really happy to hear this. That's so cool. And thanks for taking the time. You just started a new job, but I'm glad we were able to connect. It was really nice speaking with you today, Nathan.
Well, thank you so much, Mariam, and it was good to connect with you too and find somebody else that's excited about our unlimited future that we could have.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. I'm glad we had this chat. It makes me really excited for the future. Thanks again, Nathan. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.